everyone, I am Amarachi Johnson Oba and I lead the community at Veramo. A little bit about Veramo. Veramo is an open source framework that makes it easy for blockchain developers to build decentralized identities into their applications. This is the first of many interviews to come on the Build with Veramo series, where we get to have a one-on-one with teams and projects that are building amazing things with the framework. Because Veramo is open source, we don't know all the projects using Veramo at the moment, but we do hope to share through this interview some that we do know of. In today's interview, I am joined by Ankur Banerjee, the CTO and co-founder of cheqd. cheqd is enabling individuals and organizations to take full control of their data through self-sovereign identities and blockchain technologies. In this interview, we will learn about what they are building and how they are building it. All right. Thank you once again, Ankur, for honoring my invite. It's lovely to meet you and to also learn about what cheqd is doing. Actually, when we had the collaboration last year, I was following up. I was quite new in the ecosystem. I was able to read up a little bit about cheqd. But one thing I find very interesting about this interview is that right now I'm in the front seat, about to learn directly from you about everything cheqd is up to and what cheqd does. So I'm really excited for this interview. But first of all, before we get into like the very more technical aspects, I always love to know how people got into this space. Like I basically want to know more about you. How did you get into self-sovereign identity? How did you start building with decentralized identity and even the current product that you're building? How did they all come about? I'm curious to know.
Sure. So hi, my name is Ankur Banerjee. I'm the CTO and co-founder at cheqd, which is a decentralized identity startup. I'll go into some of the USPs that we are trying to build out, which we're personally quite excited about, and doing that on Veramo SDK as one of the supported SDKs. My journey into digital identity and SSI probably started about 5 to 6 years ago. At the time, I was working at a large consultancy called Accenture, and I originally started off working on digital ID for traditional digital identity or traditional enterprises. I worked on a lot of biometrics and ID checking systems for some of the world's largest banks. I worked on government use cases, for example, when you go through passport control at the border, or when you go through other forms of ID checks, let's say in a healthcare setting or an education setting. So I had a big grounding in biometrics and digital identity and how to do that in a secure fashion through that experience. And I got involved in the self-sovereign identity space because at that time, we started looking at a project around doing digital identity for refugees, which was with the UN High Commission for Refugees, which was a very interesting challenge because I think it was at the time very soon or a couple of years after the Syrian refugee crisis. And there was a real challenge that the European governments had in there's a very mobile population in terms of like how many countries the refugees are moving across. And they didn't want to create a single giant database of people who are perhaps vulnerable. And just at a technology level, that's a very challenging project to do. But B, it's also not very safe and secure and not very privacy preserving. So that's how I got involved. I then went on to work on a couple of different SSI projects, some with the National Health Service in the UK, some with other different UK and international government agencies. My co-founder, Fraser, has a very similar background. We actually used to work together on a lot of this. So we started cheqd because we found there were a couple of issues with making a self-sovereign identity viable and scalable. And that's what we decided to try and solve through when we started the company cheqd about 2 years ago. So in a very small nutshell, we wanted to solve some of the scalability challenges, i.e. we wanted to go look at how does this technology actually scale when you're perhaps talking about populations of millions, tens or hundreds of millions of people. which a lot of solutions are not designed for right now. But we also wanted to solve the problem around how can we build privacy preserving commercial models? So why should a company or an enterprise give somebody a copy of their data? That's a challenge we kept on running into all of the time. People philosophically loved the idea, but when they actually came down to implementing it and counting the numbers, it was very hard for them to justify why should they go and do SSI. And that fundamentally is one of the problems we want to solve.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing that. You have quite an interesting background, being that you've been in this space for like 5 to 6 years now. From my knowledge, I always thought that SSI was like very new. I didn't know like there were people that have been working on it for like years back. I usually thought it was like 2-3 years novelty and all of that. So thank you for sharing. And I do think that you're solving a very vital problem. And if you can maybe give us a little bit of background around cheqd, now that you've mentioned the problem you wanted to solve with your co-founder, how are you currently going about that? I believe it's through cheqd, right? But then I would also want to know, like, what is cheqd? What is it all about? I know about tokens. I know a couple of things around that, but I really want to have like a very healthy and rich overview of what cheqd is.
Sounds perfect. So what cheqd is trying to do at its core is to, number one, like we are building on the same sort of interoperable privacy preserving standards that the rest of the SSI industry is working. We are massive supporters of that kind of interoperability because I think that's very important to make data portable and in control of people. But to come back to what is unique about us and what are we trying to do differently, if I can maybe explain through an example, it might bring it to life. So when you think of a government issued ID, like a driver's license or a passport or something along those lines, typically there's a direct relationship between you and the government. You typically pay the government agency that issues the driver's license or the passport fee to give you that document, and that covers their costs for giving you that document. With the SSI space, what people have been saying is that becomes possible for every kind of data that belongs to you. That could be your education records, it could be your health records, it could be banking checks that you've already gone through. And we actually think it's beyond just those legal use cases as well. But in all of those scenarios, let's say you go and open a new bank account, typically you're not paying the bank some money to go do an ID check on you. You're just opening the account, they ask you to give some documents. And in the SSI space, people have been saying, well, wouldn't it be great if you had a copy of that check that the bank ran on you so that you can go use it the next time you perhaps need to prove your identity. The challenge that we saw is that for any kind of company that has spent some time or money or effort looking into your background and your details and validating all of that information, it's a costly process for them. And there's not a lot of benefit for them to just give out that information for free. And that's where we saw like a lot of SSI projects got stuck. And so what is the incentive for them to give you a copy of your data? We think that could be made possible by giving you a copy of the data that you can carry around in your wallet, in your laptop, perhaps print it out on paper, have it on a physical card. It doesn't matter how you store it. And you're free to present that to anyone. But if the recipient of that information wants to go then check if the information is still valid, that's where a payment is made. So it creates a bit of a freemium model, as it's called, where some of the checks are free, but some of them have payments that need to be made. And that payment could either go to you or it could go to the company that gave you that digital credential. And what we think that enables is it gives a reason for companies or organizations to give you a copy of that information. So if I, for example, if I had an SSI credential that I wrote saying I live at a particular address, maybe that's not very believable because I could just make up and say anything I want. If the same thing came from maybe an electricity provider or from a bank that has to do it for like their own sort of like legal purposes, that carries a bit more weight to it. So it's more believable as a form of information. So what we wanted to do is to give like, incentives into the ecosystem for people to share and exchange information. And some of these, like, what we are not saying, what we are not dictating is, we are not dictating a price. So people who issue credentials are free to set their own price, which could be zero. It could be like some number higher than zero. We're also not saying that necessarily the same financial model works for every single network. There could be many, many different commercial models. I think in some cases, if you had some information about yourself, maybe you're the person who gets that money from the check. In other cases, maybe it's your bank that gets the money. So we kept it pretty flexible when we went about doing it.
Oh, awesome. So I'm assuming you currently have a couple of use cases. Are there currently banks doing this or institutions like exchanging credentials for maybe a token or something? Because I didn't know that it's already happening
Yeah,
somewhere.
so there are some use cases that we've been working with some large government consortiums. I think over the past 2 or 3 years, a lot of governments had to digitize a lot of processes because of COVID. For the first time, you couldn't just go to an office with a piece of paper and they, even though that was the traditional way of doing things, many, many different governments around the world started looking at digitizing these processes. So that's been a huge driver for it. But we don't ourselves directly implement a particular use case. We are very similar to Veramo as a company in the sense that we aren't directly building a use case for education or healthcare or banking or online services or shopping and so on. We build a technology product, and we have about 40 different partners across the world who are building solutions for those particular situations. So for example, we've got partners who are working on background checks and employment checks, perhaps, let's say in the UK. That's a very different challenge than doing education credentials in the US. We've got companies that are, for example, working in South Africa and other regions in Africa on better access and training and showing off skills and certification for youngsters who are perhaps looking for their first job. So we are not directly working on any of those use cases or implementing those use cases ourselves. We build it as a technology product, and these 30 or 40 partners around the world, what they do is they specifically work on an industry or a particular geography. And that's been our strategy from the beginning, because we knew that we ourselves, as a very young and small team, couldn't necessarily cover every single industry, every single use case around the world. And it's actually good to have competition within that field, because then there's differentiation in pricing, product, features. But what we do is we work with our partners and help them and guide them to work on these particular industries. But I'd say banking, government credentials, education, healthcare are some of the big ones. More recently, what I've started seeing there's a lot more focus on is perhaps not legal identity validation use cases, which is quite exciting. This is more around how can you perhaps prove your reputation or identity online. For example, if you're interacting with somebody on Twitter or on Telegram or on Discord or on a forum which belongs to a crypto project, then how do you know that the person that you're talking to is the right person that you want to be talking to on a different forum? Because obviously As a user, I'm on maybe 50 different Telegram channels. And we've all seen examples where people create fake profiles or lookalike profiles and pretend to be somebody else. There's a lot of scams within within online communities. So that's a more different use case that we've seen a lot of interest over the past year, especially with how Ethereum has been talking about soul-bound tokens and whatnot. We're just trying to look at, say, hey, there's this thing called SSI, which actually has a good privacy preserving solution for those things, besides all of the government and healthcare and banking related stuff.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing more light on that. Talking about Veramo, I know your team wrote this very awesome piece last year regarding the implementation and collaboration between cheqd and Veramo. But I'm also curious to know, by the way, I'm going to link that piece to this interview when it's up on YouTube in the description.
Oh,
but yeah, so I'm curious to know how your team stumbled on Veramo and why you decided to use it.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. How did cheqd start building on Veramo and why did we go about it? I think at a very simple level,
basically, I also want to know, how did you, I know we are currently on different platforms, currently we are growing our presence on Twitter, LinkedIn, different places. We're also attending events. So I basically want to know, how did you even get to know that Veramo as a framework exists and then start researching around it and then eventually decided to use it? Yeah.
That's an excellent question. So I've known about Veramo for a while because, like I mentioned, been working in the SSI space for about 5 to 6 years. There's a previous incarnation of it that was known as Uport. And often when you go onto the Veramo code repositories, they still have references to Uport. So I'd come across and worked on the Uport project or the Uport repositories back in the day. And I'd known that it had sort of reincarnated itself or sort of changed its branding to the Veramo branding. So we launched our company in April 2020, so just about 2 years ago at this point. And the first thing we spent the first 12 months probably just building and launching the blockchain network that we run on. What we started looking at then is to solve the problem. The blockchain network is great. We now want to provide the tools so that people and developers can go build products on top. So early last year, we started looking at how do we go about enabling that? And one sort of target that we had was we want to build something where a new developer can get up and running and from scratch without any background knowledge or expertise. Could they implement a very simple solution in about 30 minutes? So we started looking at not just Veramo, but a lot of the other sort of software kits and projects that exist out there. We probably looked at maybe 6 or 8 of them. And what we really, really liked about Veramo was that it was designed, number one, so that it worked with multiple blockchain and multiple technology stacks. So we wanted to support stuff on browser and on mobile, because that's a reality of every single experience. And quite a few of the other competitors, they maybe only worked on mobile or only worked on desktop. And that was, we considered that to be a bit of a problem. The second thing is with the Veramo SDK, what I really like is how powerful it is. You can work with Veramo on Ethereum. We are built on Cosmos SDK, which is a different blockchain. And we were able to create a plugin that worked with Cosmos SDK. And Veramo itself also works with some other blockchain and non-blockchain mechanisms. So what we liked is the powerful flexibility of it, because putting myself in the shoes of a developer, if I was building an application, I probably want to, for my users, want to support multiple blockchains. I wouldn't necessarily just want to go build on cheqd or on Cosmos SDK. And Veramo gave us the ability to do that. So it was, and the other thing is, once we then sort of started interacting with the Veramo team and working together, anytime we hit a problem, or if we wanted to suggest like some improvements that would make things better for all Veramo users, it was very fast, quick responses, very like eager and willing to help us out. And that always helps to see that like at a partnership level, or even without a formal partnership, to see like, the engagement and the enthusiasm that we saw from Veramo was absolutely amazing. And that's how we went about building on Veramo and choosing Veramo.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that. That's a great feedback. So I hope the team sees this eventually. Of course, they will. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I don't know if this is going to be like a repetitive question, but now that you've shared why you chose Veramo, the team chose Veramo, did you see the benefits, like the things you anticipated, the reason you used Veramo, like it played out, right? The way
Yeah,
you.
I think in terms of our decision, I think it's been validated a lot. We didn't just want to build the plugin for Veramo. We also wanted to build software that could be used on mobile phones. We wanted to build software that could be run on servers so that they could like scale up to tens or thousands or millions of requests. I think what's actually been quite interesting for us is we don't just support Veramo, we also support some other like SDKs and platforms for different types of credentials. But the way that we first built the Veramo plugin, and that's one of the main ones that we go and support, what we found is the design, or the work that we did for Veramo was something that was appreciated across the rest of the software ecosystem. When we started going and showing how we built the Veramo plugin and how flexible and powerful it was, the feedback that we got and from a lot of people was, that sounds exciting. We should redo our own software to look a bit like that. So that was also fantastic feedback to hear, and that's something we've been sharing with the Veramo team as well.
Great. So in the whole experience, both in the community and, the implementation, if you were to change something about the whole process, the community, the Veramo project, do you have something you would want to change?
Yeah, I would love to implement this as a feature in Veramo, and it's something we've already started exploring internally. Just for context, like, when people talk about SSI, there's probably maybe 3 major formats of credentials. It's a bit like how you can have maybe a PDF is one file format and a doc is one file format. So similarly for SSI credentials, there's probably 3 major formats, and Veramo supports 2 of those biggest 3. And the formats that are currently supported under Veramo are the same ones that perhaps Microsoft as one company is working on, Square as another large company is working on. We also built support for those 2 formats using Veramo. There's one, like a third large format, which is called Anon Creds. And honestly, they have their own advantages and disadvantages. There's a pros and cons. We think actually they're different credential formats for different use cases, so all of them are equally valid. But one thing we'd love to be able to bring across to the Veramo feature set is being able to interact and issue this third largest credential format, which is called Anon Creds. And with Anon Creds, I think the benefit to the user of having it in one single place like Veramo SDK is the fact that you as an individual or as a user can have all the support for the largest major SSI credential formats in one single app. Right now, the reality is that you probably have to go and download different applications for different credential formats. And that means you might need 5 or 6 different applications all doing the same thing, but which can't talk to each other. And given that Veramo has already done the work as being one of the software sort of projects that supports the largest range of formats and the largest range of blockchain networks, we'd want to contribute that back to Veramo and make it even better so that it can support absolutely every single use case or credential format that exists out there. So yeah, that's something we're super excited about and we've been working on internally and would love to make that happen.
Yeah, that sounds very exciting. I'm really looking forward to that contribution. Um, okay, so one more thing that I would want to
Yeah.
ask about cheqd. Basically, from this interview, I've really learned a lot. I didn't know up to this prior to now about cheqd and how it works. So I think what you're building is very, very great. Like it's a problem that you're solving here. And I know that when it comes to projects or products, there is always an iteration. That is why we keep having version 5.0, 5.1. It keeps improving. So I know this may not be, maybe there is no very clear path, I don't know, but somehow I believe there are plans you have for the future for cheqd, like in the next maybe couple of years, where do you see cheqd going? Other problems cheqd could start solving as well, things like that. Yeah, so can you share that with us?
Absolutely. For the next sort of 1 year or the next couple of years, the core problem that cheqd really wants to go and solve is, I think we've never had a model for how to do identity online. A lot of it is in control of login with Google, login with Facebook, and there's been a bit of a movement in the past year with things like login with MetaMask to make that more decentralized, but it's still not quite there yet. What we want to build out over the next year or so is to try and tackle that problem in the traditional world. So we want to build solutions that large companies, governments, institutions can trust and stand behind. But at the same time, we also think there's a massive problem that needs to be solved just on reputation online. When you're making a crypto transaction, how do you know the person that you're sending it to is the person that you were originally intending to send it to? And people don't remember wallet addresses. Nobody's going to sit there and think of, oh, yes, I need to send it to 0x58BCD. You know, people don't think in those terms. And I don't necessarily mean legal know your customer checks or legal sort of like identity checks. It's just knowing that I maybe know you through your username on this platform. Am I transferring to the right person? And I think that is fundamentally going to make a lot of Web3 and blockchain projects and DAOs actually function and possible without a lot of scamming or without a lot of people trying to fool each other going on. And at a different level, I think I think people focus a lot on the fraud use case, but also how can we make it more fun? People got excited about NFTs because that was an interesting and collectible limited edition items that they could go and capture. How can we bring that like sort of perhaps fun aspect to a reputation and identity as well? That's something that we really want to tackle in the next 2 years. And also to say, we currently build on Cosmos SDK, but we think the problem of digital identity and reputation exists regardless of what blockchain or non-blockchain platform you're on. The same problems exist in Ethereum, Polkadot, Solana, Avalanche, and as well as in the traditional world. So what we are trying to go and solve is that problem. We want to tackle it all across the Web3 and the Web 2.0 ecosystem. And it's something that we think our unique selling point of having viable, privacy-preserving commercial models can really deliver on. And that's what we're excited to go and build in the next few years.
Sounds interesting. I look forward to what you build. Thankfully, I'm now in the SSI ecosystem and I'm watching and following up with a lot of projects. So I'm really looking forward to seeing you implement all of that within your team. If someone wants to maybe read more about cheqd, what you do, are there like links? I know I'm still going to add the links in the description, but just mention some in the course of this video.
Absolutely. Check us out at cheqd.io. And we also have product.cheqd.io where you can check out our product suite. And I can share those links with you to go take a look at. And obviously come say a hi to me on Twitter. I'm at ANKURB on Twitter. So follow me along for any tweets from the company as well as me on digital identity. And it was a pleasure chatting with you, Amarachi, as well, and sharing this with the Veramo community.
Yeah, thank you so much for your contributions, both in the community and actually for making it to this interview. And I hope that anyone who is watching this interview right now knows something about cheqd as well. So thank you very much for joining. I'm going to stop recording now.
Yep.
All right. Thank you all so much for joining. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit the subscribe button so you get notified when next we have a new video up. Until next time, do enjoy the rest of your day.